In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate a method of grafting that doesn't require working the graft right off the needles. There are no live stitches. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. Years ago, when I first learned to knit socks, I had trouble grafting the sock toes right off the needles. I always made a mistake at some point during the graft. But I soon discovered a method described by Lucy Neatbee that allowed me to graft without having to deal with live stitches, so I could correct mistakes without dropping or losing stitches. Eventually, I did learn to graft live stitches off the needles, but for the first dozen or two pairs of socks, I used the method I'll show you today. So let's get started. So this little green swatch simulates a sock toe. So I've knit it in the round and I've decreased at the edges every other round until I got down to the number of stitches I wanted. And rather than grafting the live stitches off the needle, instead I joined a contrast color of yarn, and then I worked on that whatever number of stitches I had. I didn't continue to decrease anymore, but I just worked, I think I worked 5 rounds and then bound off, so that you'll actually see 6 rounds below the bind off chain. So the idea here is that we're going to turn this is the toe chimney. We're going to turn the toe chimney to the inside, and then we're going to graft from one green stitch to the other green stitch across this gap, hiding the pink stitches on the inside, and then later we can remove the pink stitches. We can unravel the bind off chain and get rid of all of the toe chimney, and it will have a perfect graft. We're going to start in the center and we're going to graft to the left, and then we're going to return to the center and then graft to the right. So we want to find the center point. I had 10 stitches on the front and 10 stitches on the back, so I want to find my midpoint. So if I look on my edge here, I can see these would be the 2 plain knit stitches I would have had, and I had a decrease here and a decrease here. So this is a pretty standard wedge toe. So I know that this is the beginning of where the first stitch of that one needle was. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm going to place a marker here temporarily just to mark the center point. And then I'm going to do that on the second half. So again, I can see I have the 2 plain knit stitches. So this one on the left is the first one of this half of the round. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this is the midpoint here. So if we look at these stitches here, we can see the classic V-looking shape of the stitches. And we can see the pink stitches look like that as well. And on this side, we see the same thing. I've got a green V to the left of the marker and a green V to the right. If I look across from the other perspective here, what it looks like I have here is that the marker is in the center of a stitch. And that's because even though stockinette fabric looks the same right side up and upside down, when you look at it from the opposite direction of how it was knit, the V's are offset by half a stitch. What you want is to cut a new length of yarn in order to work the graft. So we're not using the original yarn that we used to do the toe. We're using a separate strand. Now normally you would use the same color that you would use for the toe, but I'm using a third color so that you can see where the graft actually ends up. So we're going to be grabbing 2 legs of each stitch on each side as we go back and forth, which is very much like seaming or anything else. And what we want to do to start is to grab where this orange marker is. I'm going to remove the marker and mark it with my finger. So we want to come behind these 2 green legs of the stitch. It looks like a V from this perspective. And what we're doing is we're following the path of this pink stitch as it comes behind the green stitch. So we're going to grab this from behind here, and we're going to pull the yarn about halfway through. We only want to pull half the yarn because we're going to use half the yarn to graft to the left, and then we're going to turn around and we're going to use the other half of the yarn to graft to the right. So we've grabbed this first V. We can see that the stitch looks like a V from this perspective. Now we're going to come over to this marker, and on this side we are grabbing, we're following the path between stitches, between these two stitches, from the center of the stitch to the center of that stitch. So once again, we're following the path of this pink stitch as it comes behind these two green stitches. So we're coming down the center of one green stitch and up the center of the other, but that is also the path that this pink stitch is following. You can see that there's pink between these two stitches here, but if we look here, we don't see between these two, we see the green head of that stitch. So we're looking always for the pink connection. So I'm going to grab these two legs right here. And from now on, we always look at where we had come from. So last time we were over here. So we want to come down in that same spot where we came out. The blue is coming out of here. So we want to put our needle down, and we grab the two legs of this green stitch. So we see this all over in knitting, where we come back when we're seaming or anything like that, that we always return to where we came out before. So here's where the blue stitch came out, so that's where we're going to go down, and we can see that we're following the path of that pink is behind there, and we're grabbing these two legs of the green stitch. So we can see how we have, if you look at it like this, you can see how the blue stitch is creating an identical V. It's much larger to the V's on either side. So we can tighten up our tension. We want that to match the tension of the other stitches. We don't have to tighten it up right away, but it's nice if we can. It's actually a good idea to hold this on the inside because you can kind of poke and prod how you want to see. So once again, we're returning back up here where the blue came out before. We're going to go down and follow the path of the pink stitch behind there. Grab the two legs. We can see where the blue stitch is coming out of the center of this green stitch, so we're going down, and then we're going to catch two legs of the green. So now we're getting into the corner where you might need to push some things up, get your finger up in there so you can see what's going on. We've got one more green stitch here that we can get. So now when we come and we look at the edge stitches, so as soon as we have in those two center knit stitches, as soon as the yarn has caught one of the legs of each of these two knit stitches. So right here, if I look at this, I can see the V of this knit stitch. This blue yarn is coming underneath the left leg of that stitch. But this stitch right here, this knit stitch on the right, we don't have any blue coming through there yet. So we're going to come down one more time through the center of this green stitch and up through the center of that green stitch. And now I've caught the right leg of this knit stitch on the right. So each one of those end stitches has been caught. So at this point, I'm just tightening up my tension on the grafting thread to match the other stitches so that they're all the same size. Because this grafting thread is it's threaded through here just like it would be if you were seaming something, you can tighten or pull completely out. I can pull this completely out and it would completely pull the graft out. So if you've made a mistake, you can just pull on this and it will completely pull the grafting yarn out. So now I want to do the other half. I can see where the blue yarn's coming out from before, so I put my needle down there and I catch my 2 green legs. And on this side, I come down the center and up the center. I want to make sure I'm going to catch the leg of one of these knit columns. Come up through the center. So I for sure have caught a leg of this knit stitch, and I can look at the other one. I have caught a leg. I just caught the left leg of the left stitch. I've caught the left leg of the left stitch and the right leg of the right stitch. So that means that when I pull the waste yarn out, everything has been caught. So I've completed the graft. Again, I want to just adjust the tension a little bit like that. So the graft is complete. Now what I can do is I come to the inside where the toe chimney is. I'm going to remove the cast on or the bind off, and now I can just ravel this. I had split a stitch, so I can trim that little pink thread. So now you can see where where the graft is on this side. Again, if I had done it in the green yarn, you wouldn't be able to see where it was at all. And now you can see it on this side. So what you want to do is thread your needle and poke these tails down through the center and then weave in your yarn tails. So you can see where this yarn tail is coming out of the center of that stitch, so I can just poke this down in between these 2 stitches here. And by catching just one leg of each of these end stitches, that helps to reduce the dog ears. So you get a nice looking result that doesn't have ends sticking up here. As we've seen, the advantage of this method is that no live stitches are involved. The graft can easily be taken out if you realize you've made an error, allowing you to really get the hang of the technique without fear of dropping or losing any live stitches. The disadvantage is that there are 3 yarn tails to weave in rather than just 1. Whether you choose to use this method for grafting sock toes is up to you, but it is worth learning the toe chimney technique even if you never use it for sock toes. Next week, I'll show you how to adapt the toe chimney in order to graft more complex patterns such as cabled fabrics or those that use lace. If you have any comments or suggestions about today's video, you can leave those down in the comments below or join me in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.